change women like most men change shirts. Well, they can't stand to be around me. What do you expect? My personal life was a wreck. But I didn't really even recognize that. The only thing I knew is I'm good at what I do. I'm successful. I'm getting a lot of media attention. I'm 30 years old. Hey, look at me. How wrong you can be. This nagging pulling at me at that point in time, combined with this discovery of this technology, gave me the idea that you might do something I didn't believe you could do. And that was rehabilitate a criminal. The warden at the prison was then a social worker, a good friend of mine, Lee Liston. He said, you know, if this can work, we should do it this way. Let's use the 288 facility, which is a youth offender facility. These aren't youth offenders. They're under 25 years of age. And in America, before they ever get to prison, they've committed at least 3 times. Let's go there. Let's run our study. So I enlisted another friend, a stat psych guy. This guy did things with statistics when he was in college that most of us looked at and said, yeah, that's really powerful, Charlie. You don't want to hear about it, though, and ran away from. He just loved numbers. We went out to the prison system. Well, let's try to lower hostility and aggression and see if we can't do something to interrupt the recidivity rate, the rate at which these people recommit crimes. How would you do that? I had a technology, but again, I was stuck with what are we going to say to these guys? So we go out to the prison and we run what's known as the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. Most extensive psychometric instrument you can run. We computer augment the delivery of it. We have these guys, volunteers. We use the Fowler lens on the MMPI, specifically designed for an incarcerated environment, and run this sophisticated psychometrics. And guess what? Doesn't tell us anything that we don't already know. High self-alienation, high social alienation. Gosh, you get that one quick, don't you?
Scan has been completed.
I have 2 problems. I understand that the inmates are there because they have low self-esteem and they don't think much of society. But you know, what am I going to say to them? I have no clue what I'm going to do there either. As we go back to the drawing board and we take a look at what and how the mind works. In order to understand the process we're going through today, we're going to have to convolute some models. In order to convolute a model, we're going to have to think entirely differently than we have ever thought in our lives. The popular definition everybody uses today about insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and somehow expecting a different outcome. In order to change, you will have to give up something that you're doing. Uncommon sense says, I'm going to look at the same thing I've looked at every day, and I'm going to look at it differently. Einstein said genius is the act of seeing the obvious, but seeing it differently. The picture that we're going to look at is of these 5 stars. And I want you to connect those stars using 4 straight lines and never lift them from the paper. 4 straight lines without ever lifting your pencil from the paper. However you do it, connect all 9 stars. This, by the way, I decided to use stars for this presentation simply because they address something higher, and I hope in part that's what we're all about today. But this is known as the 9-dot matrix, and typically you would see it as only 9 dots, and you see it in an IQ test if you get far enough along in the IQ test. Because genius really does look at this and say, okay, there's 1 line, there's 2 lines, there's 3 lines, there's 4 lines, I have a dot. But it looks at it and sees how to solve this, and it's really very simple. Somebody here has done it, correct? I see a hand. 1. Excellent. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Boy, I got a front of the class audience. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 4 straight lines now, and you never lifted your pencil from the paper, right? And you connected all 9 dots, right? All 9 of you that said you did. Is that correct? Well, I see 1 or 2 of you nodding. Look, when I try to connect these, isn't that what I try to do? Isn't that what most of you are trying to figure out how to do? And the reason I'm doing that is something in my system says this is a boundary. That's a boundary. Watch what happens if I just go beyond the boundary. That's 1 straight line, right? That's 2 straight lines, right? That's 3 straight lines, right? That's a 4th, and that connected them all, did it not? But I had to go beyond the boundary to do it. Now, the 9 7ths out there that raised their hands, is that how you did it? You went behind the boundaries or beyond the boundaries? Because if you didn't, you cheated. What is it in the human condition that says that's a boundary? What is it that causes us to think of closed-in parameters? In our course today, we're going to talk about controversy. Controversy surrounds this subject. I would like to avoid the controversy involved in subliminal information processing, but it's not possible. It ranges from those people that think your mind was written perfectly and should not be tampered with, to those people that would abuse and misuse what's been termed one of the most powerful technologies to be developed in our time. A few years ago, the state of Florida contacted my office and said, you know, we have the largest population of youth offenders of any state in the nation. We have to get them a high school education. And I was wondering if this technology of yours might facilitate in doing that. Trying to reach them can be a little difficult. Trying to teach them the value of an education when they're just going to go on to prison, that can be even more difficult. So we created some programs. The first year they used them, 21 of 24 students that sat for what we call the GED, which is a high school equivalency examination, passed. And prior to that, they weren't passing 2 in 20. Teachers were volunteering. These young people's attitudes changed. The great idea was, well, let's take this out to the schools as well. Because in Florida, Dade County particularly, they have the highest dropout in the nation. What if we were to use this in our at-risk schools where there's high dropout? It should facilitate these young people. So meetings were called, the Board of Education got together, but as with everything, there comes a point where you're also going to inform all the parents. And when they informed the parents what they were going to do, there was a number of parents of a particular religious organization that opposed it. It was tampering with the mind, and that's evil. Because they opposed it, it wasn't used, and their dropout rate is the same. It's unavoidable to talk about subliminal information processing without dealing with controversy. This controversy really began with 2 people known as James Vickery and Vance Packard. Vickery is famous for flashing Coca-Cola and popcorn on Kim Novak's face during the showing of the movie Picnic. Have you all heard about that? Subliminal messages used to sell Coca-Cola and popcorn, used to increase concession sales. He was a New Jersey theater owner, and he announced to the world that for the first time, subliminals had been used in advertising to increase sales. He also owned a business, pre-com processing, and that business built a machine that worked like a tachytoscope that would flash these messages onto the screen. And his business, in addition to the theater, was to sell these machines from pre-com processing. All right. There was a great outcry by the public. And in 1984, the year of George Orwell, Congress had hearings. The public was so outraged that Congress was intent on getting to the bottom of subliminal processing so that it was not abused. James Vickery was called. All of America, he had become a villain. And Congress interrogated him. And in front of Congress, he denied ever doing it. You will read what we call cult science, where someone says Vickery sold popcorn and Coca-Cola. And you'll read elsewhere when someone says that never happened. The fact is, we really don't know. All we know is it caused an outrage. Now, we do know that he had the ability to do it because he had a patent on the machine. My own suspicion is there's not too much doubt, but if you can understand with that kind of pressure why he'd say, I never really did that. But with this controversy all over the world, particularly the Western world at the time, along comes Vance Packard, and he writes a very famous book called The Hidden Persuaders. It's an overnight sensation, and it spends and is dedicated in large to the covert manipulation in a lot of ways, including subliminal communication. Covert manipulation of the public by those that would sell you something, whether it was a belief or a product. Well, I was aware of all this controversy, obviously, when I first came into the field, and to a degree, I was also bemused by these manufacturers with their Coca-Cola secrets. I was cynical, I will admit that, about almost everything I read at the time having anything to do with subliminal information processing. But now I'm going to jump forward a bit so we can finish this piece of our puzzle and begin another one. 1990, and there's a very famous case in America. There's an English heavy metal group called Judas Priest. They've done a recording. Purportedly, this recording contains subliminal messages. Two young men, Vance and Belknap, have listened to this repeatedly one afternoon. Well, they had a couple of beers, and actually they consumed the equivalent of 3.5 beers apiece. Be precise on that. They took their father's shotgun, they went down to the schoolyard, put the shotgun underneath their head. Belknap pulled the trigger, boom, one dead. Vance, who survived because he failed to brace the shotgun, later told us he didn't want to do it, but he felt like he had to do it. Belknap had done it. He puts the shotgun up, boom, takes off the front of his face. Took him 4 years to die. Many surgeries in the process trying to save him. The parents bring a wrongful death action against Judas Priest and CBS Records. Judas Priest, known to use subliminals, admit in the court they have used them, but they didn't on this one. Yours truly is called in. So a whole host of people. And I go through the facts, what happened on that day, the research, what we can say about what kind of message, what kind of mentality, what kind of personality profile, where would these young men have to be if this were to be a causal factor. It's clear. We find the subliminal message, do it, do it, do it, hidden in the lyrics that overtly encourage suicide in the Better By You, Better Than Me recording. The subliminal command, do it. It's clear. We demonstrated to the court. The court acknowledges it's there. No question about it. In my book, Thinking Without Thinking, I go through great detail on this particular case, including the full deposition. But here, we'll shorten that up. They start chanting, do it. They take a shotgun and blow the top of their head off, which is exactly what the album cover to Stained Glass shows, the top of the head lifting off. Pretty hard to say this isn't a causal factor. I find myself, therefore, opposed to CBS and Judas Priest in a court, saying, yeah, this probably is a causal factor. CBS couldn't find the original master. They hired a Scotland Yard detective to find it. They argued that the do it command was a coincidence of sound, not intentionally placed there. The Scotland Yard investigator testified that he searched and searched in England and in the United States for the master, because we'd need the master to be able to demonstrate whether it was coincidence of sound or intentional. This is wrongful death. You're going to have to demonstrate intention. They couldn't find the master. On the stand, our witness, our Scotland Yard investigator, was asked, did you look in the vaults at CBS? And his answer was, no, they wouldn't let me. CBS was fined so many times in this case by the judge for impeding the discovery process, for manipulating the media, the press, et cetera and so forth, that it really just became kind of comical if it wasn't so sad. But the fines under Nevada law were like $40,000. Well, fining them $40,000 is, you want 4 pennies to me. But the outcome at law was the subliminal message existed, but there was insufficient evidence to demonstrate that it could influence behavior significantly enough to cause 2 young men to go out and shoot themselves. When I gave deposition and hearing at the trial, I was asked, is this a causal factor? And in my opinion, yes. But I was asked so many times, well, okay, it's a causal factor. How big a causal factor? It's a 50% of the reason? I can't answer that. Is it 10% of the reason? How? I can't answer that. Well, is it 1%? Look, guys, I can't fractionate it. I can only say, when you ask, is this a causal factor? If we subtract this from the puzzle, could we say they probably would have done what they did, including chant, do it, do it, do it? Not likely, but I can't tell you what percentage. That became very significant. During this entire process, what we learned was it's very easy to manipulate the masses with misinformation. It just takes a little bit of money and a little bit of cunning. Let's digress now. I'm back at the prison system 10 years prior to this, And we're trying to decide what we're going to say to the inmates. But in order to come up with something to say to the inmates, I have to understand how the mind works. Now, how do I do that? I'm going to tell you a little story. The story I want to tell you about right now is called The Chicken and the Eagle. And I want you to become a chicken for a minute in your mind. I want you to imagine that you are the star of our chicken story. You're really an eagle, but you're being raised in a chicken unit. Your peers that guide you are chickens, are good chickens, but they too were raised in a chicken unit. And you have learned to dig like a chicken. You have learned to make a hole and get down in it on a hot day. You've learned to caulk when somebody lays an egg. You have become a good chicken. You have been imprinted, and that's the word in psychology, just like a young duckling raised with chickens or a young chicken raised with ducklings. You're behaving according to your environment. But you're really a very beautiful eagle out in this chicken yard. And one day, along comes a male eagle. And flying over the chicken coop, he sees the female eagle. And she's down there doing all these chicken things. And he circles. He can't believe what he's seeing. And a shadow falls on the chicken yard. And one of the chickens lets out the notice. And they all run into the chicken house because there was an eagle. Well, the eagle hides, and he watches the chicken yard for days. And one day, the female wanders just far enough away from the house that he's certain he can intercept her before she could get back. So down he swoops. He cuts off her retreat. All the other chickens get into the chicken yard, into the chicken house. He has her cornered. The chickens inside are all worried about her. And he says, "What are you doing here in this chicken yard?" And she says, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, you're an eagle. Look at yourself. You're an eagle. You're not a chicken." "Really?" she says, thinking, what's this eagle got up his sleeve? What's he going to do to me? And the eagle says, "Look, as an eagle, you can soar. You can fly higher. You are dominion of the sky. As an eagle, you don't belong in a chicken yard digging. You belong high above all of nature, accepting the wind, feeling it lift you, diving and feeling it raise." This just frightens the female eagle. But she's cunning. She is cunning. So she says to the male eagle, "Well, if I'm really an eagle, then you're not going to do me any harm, are you?" "Of course not," he answers. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help you." "Well, if that's the instance, then you'll get out of my way. You won't block me if I wanted to leave, will you?" "No, I'm not going to hurt you. Look, I'll step over here." And as he steps, she runs to the chicken house. Safe inside the chicken house, she tells all her chicken friends how she outsmarted the eagle. And they all, "Wow, good job." Now, if you think about that story for a minute, and you think about yourself, were you raised with any of the same thing I was raised with? The negative scripting, the chicken yard beliefs. You're not smart enough. You're not old enough. You're not good looking enough. You're too stupid. You don't try hard enough. That's not good. This is evil. That's bad. You do understand then that if you have chicken yard beliefs, those beliefs can block you from realizing what you might want in life and what you're entitled to, your highest best. many people here would like to make $1 million? Raise your hand. How many of you here would like to make $1 million this year? Raise your hand. Now, the elite down here are left out of this, okay? But the rest of us, folks, raise your hand. Want to make $1 million this year? Okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to say to yourself, and say it seriously, meaningfully, okay? I'm going to make $1 million this year. Say it to yourself. Say it sincerely. I mean, really say it to where you believe it. Say, I'm going to make $1 million this year. Do it. Is any of you getting back talk like, yeah, what are you going to do, rob a bank? How many of you here believe that you really could do that this year? If you really believed you could, you probably would. If Bill Gates is in this room, do you think he's going to say, oh, I wonder if I really can make $1 million? Million? Heck, he's going to say, that doesn't take care of my butler. Got to be a lot more than that. If we think then about our chicken yard story and we tie it to something I call the 4 faces of self, which is really developing from Singer's work. If each of us look at ourselves, there's an actual self. Think about that. You have an actual self. That's who you really are. In your privacy, wherever that might be, that's who you are. You know yourself. You know what you're afraid of. You know what you want to avoid. You know what you seek to have fun with. You know your mistakes. You know the things that you believe you've done right that make you feel good. That's your actual self. In part, because some of yourself is hidden from you. And I hope you'll learn that today. But that's how you see yourself today, your actual self. Now understand that actual self is not your ideal self. You have an ideal self. You started developing an ideal self when you were